Today on the newscast, Hezbollah boasts of a massive terrorist army, and Israel devotes over $1 billion to stopping Iran's nuclear program. Get all the breaking details next. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. Hezbollah leader Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah has basically spent the last 15 years since Israel's 2006 war with Hezbollah moving from place to place and living in underground bunkers. From time to time, Nasrallah rears his head and delivers a speech to his followers, and that's exactly what he did yesterday, Monday, October 18th, and a very important speech at that. Nasrallah boasted that Hezbollah has some 100,000 trained jihadi fighters. Now, more on those numbers and their accuracy in a second, but why did Nasrallah give this speech? Well, if you remember last week here on the newscast, we reported of a major flare-up on the streets of Beirut. Hezbollah held a rally late last week calling for the ouster of a Lebanese judge, Erick Stakelbeck, who basically is holding Hezbollah to account in the ongoing investigation into that massive explosion at the Beirut port in August 2020. Now, you probably remember those images. It literally looked like a mushroom cloud there at the port of Beirut. Hundreds of people killed, thousands more injured, hundreds of thousands left homeless, and a large chunk of downtown Beirut destroyed. Lebanon has really gone into a tailspin since that horrific incident. The unemployment, the poverty, people starving quite literally in that country. Keep them in your prayers. So needless to say, there are some in Lebanon who want to get to the bottom of what happened with this massive explosion in August 2020, where this ammonium nitrate literally went up in flames. Many suspect Hezbollah involvement in storing that ammonium nitrate at the Beirut port in preparation to use it in future terror attacks. Obviously, it was mishandled. It did not go that way, and it went up, and it took a good chunk of downtown Beirut with it. So we've got the investigation, and this judge, a courageous man, I give him a lot of credit, Erick Stakelbeck, is saying, hey, I want to interview Hezbollah members and leaders as part of my probe into what exactly happened. Well, surprise, surprise, Hezbollah does not like that very much, and they are rallying against this judge, literally rallying in the streets of Beirut last week. And during this Hezbollah rally, violence broke out. 7 people were killed, dozens more were wounded on the streets of Beirut as Hezbollah attacked other groups in Beirut and instigated a melee. And now there are fears increasing by the day that civil war could be on the horizon in Lebanon. Look no further, obviously, than the history of that country, the 1970s and 80s in particular, a bloody, brutal sectarian civil war. But also look at the ongoing woes. Lebanon is on the brink of collapse, folks, not only economically, as I mentioned, but politically, major instability. And the main problem in that country is that Hezbollah has established a state within a state in southern Lebanon, which means, by extension, Hezbollah's masters in Tehran, the Iranian regime, have a state within a state in southern Lebanon. Nasrallah said that, look, 100,000 trained jihadi fighters in Hezbollah's ranks, and basically he said, we will not hesitate to use them. I saw this speech as mainly for domestic consumption in terms of Nasrallah and Hezbollah threatening any rival factions in Lebanon, but clearly also a message sent to Israel and to the region about Hezbollah and, again, by extension, Iran's growing strength. Now, we know that Hezbollah has some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. We know that these missiles, some of them, are increasingly precision-guided, meaning they will hit their target with greater accuracy. Those missiles and the parts to assemble those missiles are provided by the Iranian regime. We know that Hezbollah has dug tunnels under the Lebanon border into Israel. We know that because we've showed you that firsthand. I've been in these tunnels here on the Watchman Newscast and on our Watchman TV program on TBN, and we know that Nasrallah has talked about a ground invasion in any future conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. He's talked about seizing towns in the Galilee. So we know all that, but does Hezbollah really have 100,000 trained fighters? Folks, I have to say, based on conversations I've had with Israeli military officials, that number seems high for sure. I would put the number in the tens of thousands, certainly, but 100,000 seems quite high, and it seems like boasting and a bit of exaggeration by Nasrallah. Nevertheless, even tens of thousands, say 30, 40,000, 50,000 trained Hezbollah fighters is a major, major danger. This is a standing terrorist army which controls a large part of territory in the form of southern Lebanon. So a serious threat, battle-trained, battle-tested on the battlefields of Syria in particular over the past decade, where, by the way, Hezbollah has lost many fighters fighting in Syria on behalf of the Iranian regime and the Assad regime. So a lethal, formidable force, to say the least, but 100,000 fighters seems like a stretch. Nevertheless, a serious, serious threat to the stability and the future, not only of Lebanon, but to Israel and the region, and I'd say the world as well. Remember, Hezbollah also has an external terror apparatus which has carried out attacks in Latin America, Europe, Africa, and elsewhere around the world. So this is, again, the world's most dangerous terrorist organization, a fully functioning terrorist army, a terrorist militia that we have in the form of Hezbollah. And speaking of those rockets, an Israeli military leader said this week that he expects in the next conflict, and we know it's coming, between Israel and Hezbollah to the north and the Iranian regime to the north, in Lebanon and in Syria. This military official for the IDF said he expects that Hezbollah will launch up to 2,000 rockets per day against Israeli towns and cities. Just for some context here, in the May 2021 war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, Hamas launched over 11 days 4,400 rockets. And you think of all the damage that did. Well, imagine 2,000 rockets per day, which would dwarf the Hamas output in May, which was bad enough. Last thing to mention that we'll get into on tomorrow's Watchman Newscast live stream, the Israeli government has reportedly devoted some $1.5 billion, a $1.5 billion budget solely focused on a potential strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. This budget would include money for airplanes, fighter jets, drones, intelligence gathering drones, and other armaments which are needed to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. I'll leave you with that today. We're going to pick that up tomorrow. We're going for 1 hour solid between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on our YouTube channel, the Watchman YouTube channel, for a live stream. I'll also be taking your questions, so be sure to send in your questions. We'll have a Q&A session during this live stream, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Much to talk about. Again, we'll get into this. Is Israel prepping for a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities? What are the prophetic implications? We'll get into all of that for 1 solid hour live tomorrow. Do not miss it. Join us right here. And again, keep the people of Lebanon in your prayer. Keep the entire region in your prayer, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. That's not a Watchman mandate. That is a biblical mandate. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the newscast. Until tomorrow's live stream, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.